Good morning, church.
Good morning.
There's some irony that we're having this worship service about rest as resistance on a day of low barometric pressure. I had a relative who was a science teacher, and he firmly believed that you might as well not do anything on days of low barometric pressure because you weren't going to get anything done anyway. So it's impressive that you made it out, and I thank you for it. Please join me in a word of prayer. Dear Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our Redeemer. There is always one more thing to do. One more email to answer, one more person to call, one more meeting to attend, one more injustice demanding our attention, one more terrible story appearing on our phones. And for people like us who care deeply, this is particularly difficult. The problem isn't that we don't care. The problem is that we care incredibly deeply. We care about our neighbors. We care about immigrants and refugees. We care about people who are hungry and people who are frightened. We care about racism and poverty and violence. We care about what is happening in our communities and what is happening halfway around the world. And because we care, we feel deeply as well. We carry these stories home with us. We wake up in the middle of the night thinking about them. Sometimes we reach for our phones before our feet have touched the floor, and within minutes the suffering of the world has entered the bedroom. And then somebody says, "You need rest." Rest? Now? Have you seen what is happening? How am I supposed to rest when people are being detained? When families are afraid? When people are hungry? When wars continue? When the earth is warming? When people I love are hurting? How do you lie down when the world is on fire? You see, there's this strange moment in the book of Ezekiel when God tells the prophet, "Go lie down." Ezekiel is commanded to lie on one side and then the other, his very body becoming a prophetic sign. This isn't a Sabbath nap. Ezekiel isn't relaxing. So this isn't self-care. It is profoundly uncomfortable. Here's a prophet living in a moment of catastrophe. His people have been displaced. An empire has swallowed their nation, and Jerusalem is under threat. Everything is unstable. And God puts the prophet on the ground. Lie down. I usually imagine resistance somewhat differently. Resistance stands up, marches, organizes. Resistance speaks, makes phone calls and holds signs and shows up. And thank God for all of that. There are moments when faithfulness means standing up. But Ezekiel gives us this strange image of a prophet whose body becomes a message precisely because he is not moving. Sometimes the body that refuses to keep moving can tell the truth too. I've been thinking about that because I'm about to do something that is surprisingly difficult for me. I'm about to go on a renewal leave. In a week. For 10 weeks. The policy where I work allows full-time employees every 7th year to step away for a period of renewal. Every 7th year. You don't have to know much about the Bible to hear the echo, do you? The biblical imagination is filled with sevens. 6 days you shall labor, and on the 7th, stop. 6 years you shall sow the land, and in the 7th, stop. But what fascinates me the most about the 7th year is that it doesn't wait until everything is finished. Sabbath doesn't arrive when your inbox is empty. The 7th year doesn't arrive when every field has been cultivated, every problem has been solved, every injustice has been corrected, and everyone who needs you has stopped needing you. It simply arrives. God says, enough. And that word can be particularly difficult for people who care deeply. Because compassionate people face a particular spiritual danger. We can begin to believe that because something deserves our attention, we are required to give it our attention. But those are not the same thing, are they? Every suffering person deserves care. But I cannot personally care for every suffering person. Every injustice deserves resistance. I cannot personally resist every injustice. Every grief deserves to be witnessed. I cannot personally carry every grief. There are more things worthy of our compassion than any human heart can hold. And that isn't a moral failure. That is what it means to be human, on a humid day. We are finite. We have bodies. We become tired. We have to eat. We have to sleep. Eventually, we have to lie down. The trouble begins when we treat those limitations as defects to overcome. All too often, we define ourselves by our work. You can see this clearly in the Exodus story. Pharaoh has a simple theology of human beings. Human beings make bricks. That is what they are for. And when the Israelites ask for time away from their labor to worship God, Pharaoh increases their workload. No more straw, same number of bricks, more work, same deadline. And then Pharaoh gives them a name: lazy. That word has followed exhausted people through history. Lazy, uncommitted, not dedicated enough, not willing to go the extra mile, not a team player. There is always a Pharaoh somewhere explaining why you should make one more brick. And eventually, Pharaoh doesn't have to say anything anymore. We become our own taskmasters because Pharaoh gets inside of us. And then God liberates the Israelites from Egypt. And one of the things God has to teach formerly enslaved people is how to stop. They know how to work. They know how to survive. They know how to produce. They know what happens when the quota is not met. But freedom requires learning something they were never allowed to practice in Egypt: rest. In Deuteronomy, when God commands Sabbath, God connects it directly to liberation. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt. In other words, you don't live there anymore. Pharaoh doesn't own your time. Pharaoh doesn't own your body. Pharaoh doesn't determine your worth. So once every 7 days, do something Pharaoh would never permit. Stop making bricks. That makes Sabbath more than self-care. Sabbath is resistance. The Sabbath vision is much more radical than we can imagine. Nobody's flourishing should require someone else's endless exhaustion. Sabbath imagines community where none of us should have to live like slaves. But there's another reason some of us have trouble resting. Sometimes being needed feels good. Sometimes being indispensable feels meaningful. And sometimes exhaustion becomes evidence we present to ourselves. See how much I matter? And this gets especially complicated when the work is good. What if the work matters? What if people's lives really are affected? What if there really is an injustice? What if someone really does need help? Then stopping can feel irresponsible. And Sabbath asks a frightening question. Can you leave good work unfinished? Can you acknowledge that something important remains to be done and lie down anyway? That is the kind of rest I want to learn. Not the rest of indifference, not the rest that looks away from suffering, but the rest that says, this matters enormously, and I'm still going to lie down. Because both of those things can be true at the same time. I care, and I have limits. I care, and I cannot fix everything. I care, and tonight I will sleep. Maybe there is a distinction we need to learn between caring and carrying. We are called to care about the world. We are not called to carry the world. Compassion says, your suffering matters to me, but something else says, therefore I must hold everything together. But Christian faith has a name for the one who holds everything together. And it isn't you, and it isn't me, it's God. So we sleep, we turn off the phone, we stop reading those email messages, we leave something unfinished, we eat a meal slowly, we go for a walk, we listen to music, we laugh. Sometimes when the world is suffering, even laughter can feel irresponsible, right? But joy can be resistance too. Because there are forces in this world that would happily occupy every room of the human heart. But joy says, you can't have the whole house. So, I'm going on renewal leave in a little over a week. And I suspect one of the things I will have to practice is leaving some bricks unmade. There will still be emails. There will still be problems. There will still be people I care about. And there will still be important work happening. there will still be injustice. The seventh year does not arrive because everything is finished. The seventh year arrives because it is the seventh year. Perhaps part of renewal is discovering what happens when I am no longer producing for the institution that normally receives so much of my energy. Who am I when I am not responding? Who am I when I'm not fixing problems? Who am I when I'm not needed in the same way? Who am I when I lie down? Maybe that is why Sabbath requires faith. I wonder if some of you need permission to ask those questions too, because I know this is a congregation that cares. Please don't stop caring. The world needs people whose hearts can still be moved, but the world does not need your exhaustion. Your exhaustion is not the measure of your faithfulness, and maybe sometimes the faithful response to a world that tells you there is always one more brick to be made is simply no. Not because the brick doesn't matter, not because the work doesn't matter, not because the suffering doesn't matter, but because I am a human being and not a machine. Pharaoh doesn't own me. My employer doesn't own me. The movement doesn't own me. Even the causes I love do not own me. My worth is not measured by my usefulness. God is God. I am not. Perhaps that is what Sabbath teaches us every 7 days. Perhaps that is what the seventh year teaches us. And perhaps, in a strange and unsettling way, that is what Ezekiel's body on the ground asks us to consider. That there's a time to stand, a time to march, a time to speak, a time to resist, a time to make the bricks, and a time when faithfulness sounds like this: lie down. Amen.